All right, this is where we are in the Amida Sutra. We were talking about the Saha words, the corruptions of the age, the corruption of views, corruptions of afflictions, corruptions of sentient beings, and corruptions of lifespan, shortened lifespan to achieve perfect enlightenment. So let's do a quick review here. The corruptions are the war of five tibidities. We just mentioned about the tibidities. Now, in this sutra, this part of the sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha is being praised by all Buddhas for having achieved an extremely difficult task, which is to achieve perfect enlightenment in this world of five tibidities. The Buddha is so compassionate to teach sentient beings to help others to achieve Buddhahood as well. And how is he teaching the world? Well, in the Vimalakirti Sutras, he was asked, Vimalakirti, when we have a chance, we will talk about him, but he was a very prominent lay person, Buddhist, at the time of the Buddha. And he was very well known for his ability to understand the Buddha and to his achievement as well. So a very prominent lay person at that time. And he was asked how the Buddha would teach the world. And of course, he mentioned of this is purity, this is impurity, this is how you achieve such and such a level. And then we got to talking about the six realms. So our karmic tendencies create the six realms, right? From all the way from hell, hungry ghosts, animal realms, human realms, the Asura realms, the demigods, and the heaven realms. And it's not the other way around. It's not that those realms are there that we are born into, but because of our thinking, our wrong views have led us to those, essentially have our karmic tendencies have created the environment for us. Does it make sense? It's not that there are existing realms that we go into. There's like a world that we travel to, or like a country that's already existing that we go to, and then we conform to the country, the norms and the rules of the country. But in fact, these realms here that we have something in common with others, that we have a set belief, we create these karmic tendencies to create those realms. Right? So the realms that we are in, they are not fixed and permanent. They are because we have created them. So if we have created them because of our delusion that we get stuck in them and that we cannot get away. Therefore, these realms here are not fixed. They are not permanent. But because we have created them, we can remove them. We can be liberated from them. So because of wrong views and not understanding conditionality, that we think these realms are permanent. And because we think they're permanent, that we have to conform to them, we get stuck. So the Buddha essentially shows sentient beings liberation from the six realms. And that's what we talked about last time, the six realms. In the middle of this drawing, right, you have one side, you have delusions, the core of our being. Those elements are delusions, greed, and anger. And they create under the influence that we create karma, either unskillful karma on the dark side or skillful karma on the bright side. And because of those karmic tendencies that we create these six realms, the realms of the heaven, the realms of human beings, the realms of Asura, these are the upper realm. And then you have the realms of animals, the realms of hell, and the realms of hungry ghosts. And if you notice here that in each realm there is a Buddha teaching sentient beings in those realms how to be liberated from the cycle of life and death. And we talked about that. And then now we will talk about the outer ring, the outermost ring. This is the process of life and death, or the process of life. So these rings here, 12 因缘, 12nhân duyên, 12 nhân duyên. These rings here defines our life, and this is what we conform to. We get stuck in this cycle, and we cannot break ourselves away from this. And we will discuss later on how to break away from this 12 links. And then, of course, here later on we'll talk about who this figure is, this ferocious-looking figure. And then you have the Buddha on the right-hand side here, and then empty clouds, if you will, on the left-hand side, and we will see what those represent. In these 6 realms, the most, joyful, the happiest is the heaven realm. But there's a downside to that. So being in heaven is not the absolute. That there are, if you can imagine, there are drawbacks, there are side effects of being in the heaven realm. So that's why the Buddha is saying, don't rely on the 6 realms to find happiness, true happiness, because there's none. Nothing's existing. It does not exist. And the reason it is that too much worldly happiness can become an obstruction. So even in the heaven realms, it's still considered worldly, according to Buddhist perspective. It's still within the cycle of life and death. So in fact, in the heaven realms, there that you have less of a chance of achieving liberation, spiritual liberation. It's kind of sobering to know that if you go to the heaven realms, you may have happiness, but your chance of being liberated spiritually to achieve that spiritual liberation is very, very slim. I wouldn't say none, but it's very slim. And it is very difficult because of the mundane happiness and pleasure that we get stuck in. And it is much easier, although still difficult, is to achieve spiritual progress from a state of intense suffering. So relatively speaking, between hell and heaven, you have more chance, according to this view, you have more chance of achieving Buddhahood in the realms of hell than in the realms of heaven, and we will see why. So we are in a very perfect equilibrium in the human realm because that's our best chance of achieving spiritual liberation. We have a very good mixture of happiness and suffering. And suffering is a catalyst for us to be awakened, right? It brings a sense of reality that we are not in the best state and that we have something to be aspired to. So being humans, is very fortunate, if you will. I mean, for example, like serious illness or intense distress, that you bring yourself back to reality. You say, this is not worth it. I'm being stuck in here and I need to find a way out, right? It brings us back to reality. But if everything flows smoothly, we tend to forget about the impermanence. We tend to forget about that one day we will have to leave this world. And because of this balance of suffering and joy, and more so on the suffering, is that it makes us more sensitive to spiritual growth and spiritual influences. But of course, it doesn't mean that we should seek misery in life in order to achieve that goal. It will not help, right? One extreme is to indulge in joy, to forget about the pain, hopefully, and totally be in delusion. And the other extreme is to find misery so that you can find a way out. The Buddha has shown us that it does not work, that when you go on extremes. Because self-inflicted suffering is not the way to be liberated from the cycle of life and death. And of course, self-indulgence doesn't help either. So the two extremes that we should avoid, the two extremes are self-inflicted suffering and self-indulgence. Those two we should avoid. But it doesn't mean that living a good life is not worth it. It helps. And it does not waste time, having a good life. Not necessarily. For example, like sleep. When you have enough sleep, when your body feels invigorated and you have the energy to move on, to do things that you need to do. So having sleep or having a good life is like a rest from mundane existence. When you awake, you have the energy to move on, and you will be more happy, you'll be more positive, and you will put in the efforts because you have an energy now to progress. Of course, it is a different matter if after you feel invigorated, you go out and party and you create unskillful karma, then it's not going to help yourself, and it's not going to help others when you do things unskillfully. But the point here is that having a good life, treasure the happiness that you have so that you have enough reserve of the energy to make a positive spiritual growth, spiritual effort. Right? Of course, the danger in that is that in the realms of God or in a state of happiness that we think we have, He gives us a false sense of security. And just like when we're dreaming, we are very passive. We don't make we don't have that active growth, right? We kind of lose control in our dream. And similarly, when we are in a state of happiness, we lose a sense of awareness, and that we lose a sense of our goal and our focus. And so that's the danger. And the danger is that contentment, even though contentment, we've been talking about contentment where it is good, right? To be happy with what you have. But the danger with that is that we will become complacent or tend to become complacent. That's the fatal flaw of life in the God realm. That is also a flaw with having too much abundance of material goods and that you feel happy all the time. It can lead you to complacency. Right? So a positive life is encouraging. And of course, this is much better than a negative life, right? And the Western Pure Land, Sukhavati, is a very positive environment for spiritual growth and progress. So in this world, we have to put in a lot of efforts to overcome obstacles in reaching Buddhahood. And of course, if we are heroic like the Buddha, then we have no problem reaching our Buddhahood. But a better alternative is to be in the Western Pure Land, Sukhavati, where the environment is more suitable for spiritual growth. So what is it that makes it so difficult to achieve Buddhahood in this realm, in this world? Tibetan teacher Gampopa, in his work, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation, he says that it is so strange that we, the human beings, have not achieved Buddhahood. So we should ask ourselves, why is it that we have not attained Buddhahood? Why is it that it has been taking us so long to achieve perfect enlightenment? Well, he came up with 4 reasons why we have not achieved enlightenment for ourselves. One is that we are attached to sensuous experiences, the worldly sensuous experiences. The second is that we are attached to sensual pleasures. There's a difference between the two. And then the third is that we have this self-complacency, 自满, 鲁莽. We think that we have it all, and we lose a sense of urgency. And then the fourth obstacle is that we are drowned in ignorance about the means of realizing Buddhahood. Perhaps we don't, so some people, the majority of people, they don't even realize that they have that potential in them to achieve Buddhahood, right? And maybe that's how we were before we encountered Buddhism. We had no idea that we had this potential. So the first obstacle here is sensuous experiences, is that you take it for granted that your world will continue. That we think that whatever we see will last forever. Our pleasures will last forever, and we get indulged in our pleasures, and we have lost that sense that, or at least in fact, sometimes we even fight to preserve that permanence. And that's why we get stuck in it. We're not willing to move beyond our sensuous world, sensuous experiences. And that's why we are hindered to achieve Buddhahood. The second obstacle is that we take pleasure as the highest value. Right? We live to enjoy. We live to eat, for example. And we forget our long-term interest, our long-term goals to achieve Buddhahood, because we are distracted of the amusements that we have in front of us, and we are distracted by our pursuit to our sensual pleasures. That's why we forget about our spiritual long-term interest. The third is that we are satisfied with who we are. Even though the teaching is to be happy with what you have and to know who you are, it's just a means to the end. It's not the end, right? So we should understand that, yes, we are happy because we want to avoid these afflictions, not to have greed, anger, delusion stirring us up, but we want to subside. It's like a tank of water where there's a lot of sediment, a lot of dirt still in that tank. When we have this contentment, we are settling the sediment down to the bottom and not stirring the pot, so we have clear water to drink, right, to utilize. And it's not that we are happy with what we have, but there's still a lot of dirt in that tank. So when we are taught with different principles, we should judge, you should compare where you are in your spiritual progress, and not to take the principles as the ends in themselves. Does it make sense? Right? So every time we progress, we should have this evaluation of our principles, and not just to say, this is it. This is what I've learned, that's it. I don't want to learn anymore, or this is like the final. No, every time you grow, you have different thinking. Your knowledge has grown, and therefore you should evaluate and take on the next principles, perhaps. Learn the next principle that is more applicable to your state of being. So when at the beginning, we are taught contentment, and that is fine. But you will soon realize that as you grow, that contentment of what you have is no longer enough, because it will keep you within your shell if you don't have the willingness to grow. Does it make sense? So that's the problem. The third problem is that we become contented, that we don't want to grow. Right? We are happy with what we've been doing, and we meditate every day, but there's no sense of urgency. Right? You lost this sense of urgency with regards to spiritual development. So there was a man who wished to cultivate spiritual liberation. Right? He saw the masters cultivating, very peaceful in life, and so he wanted to achieve the same thing too. So he attended, lectures and activities at the temple, and the master would encourage him to put in more efforts to continue his progress, because he was being complacent. In fact, he was not really complacent, he was more distracted. He said, yes, I understand the value of cultivation, but as soon as I have resolved my 3 problems, I will dedicate my life, the rest of my life, to cultivation, spiritual cultivation. And Master, believe me, immediately after I have resolved my problems, I will commit myself, my time to that. And then the Master asked him, what are the 3 things that are so important that consume your time now that you cannot commit your time to the practice? Well, he said, there are 3 things, and there are really urgent things that I need to take care of. The first thing is that the funeral of my parent has not been complete. I still need to bury his casket. So it's still sitting in the living room. I need to do something about it. The viewing is done. I need to take care of that. All right. And then the second thing is that my young daughter is not yet married. I need to find a husband for her so that she can have a family. And the third thing is that my young son is still yet not married. So, masters, as long as these three things are resolved, trust me, I will immediately spend more time at the temple, spend more time meditating and practicing. Well, long and behold, before all these three things are complete, he finds himself lying on his deathbed, right? Regretting the time that he has lost. So we should not wait. We should not lose our focus. We should not lose our sense of urgency. We think we live forever, but we don't. We like to think that, but we don't. Anybody can be sick at any time, right? We don't know that a person can be very healthy one day and then be sick the next day. But of course, we shouldn't take it to the extreme, right? We need to make sure that we live accordingly, take care of the things that we need to take care of, but do not lose a focus of spiritual liberation, right? So just like when we meditate, we're looking in before us, but we're not staring at it. We're not being attached to the things that are before us. But at the same time, we are mindful. We have this awareness of the physical body to maintain awareness. Does it make sense? So you kind of have to balance between what is it that you need to do. So cultivation is not just to drop everything. Cultivation is not to go to one extreme or the other, but to maintain this middle path. And this middle path requires wisdom. You need to do what you need to do, but don't lose your focus. Does it make sense? So it's important to understand that these four obstacles are really obstacles, like detrimental obstacles to our progress. So we should be aware of complacencies that we have, and we must keep on growing. That's the message of this. Does it make sense? Because the environment in Sukhavati of Amitabha is of non-progression and of no suffering whatsoever. And we know that based on his vows. Right? The first vow says that there are no evil realms of hell, hungry ghosts, and animal. So we know that we won't be any danger. Even if we don't progress, at least we know that we won't regress towards the evil realms and be stuck in there. But of course, it's not possible for us to not progress. Because when we are in an environment where it is progressing, the beings, the bodhisattvas around us are progressing, the environment is encouraging us to progress. There is no way that we cannot progress. So to say that we won't progress is impossible. The second vow that Amitabha made is that those who are in Sukhavati will have long lifespan. We will have enough, more than enough reserve, if you will, to achieve Buddhahood. And that is vow number 34, is to achieve Buddhahood within one lifetime. We will not have to continue to cycle through the cycle of life and death. Because every time that we have rebirth in the samsara, we go back to square one. We start all over again. And that's the problem with this samsara, is that we continue to put in endless efforts, but we're not going anywhere. It is just like a hamster in its wheel, spinning, running, putting in all efforts, but it's not getting anywhere. So it is wise of us to find an environment so that we can continue to have this spiral growth and not cyclic growth. Right? We don't want to be that hamster running in its wheel, not getting anywhere. But we want to get somewhere with our efforts. And Amitabha has put in the efforts to create an environment where we can achieve Buddhahood within one lifetime. Once you are reborn in Sukhavati, before your next rebirth, you have already achieved Buddhahood. Does it make sense? So this is very attractive feature of the Western Pure Land. It may not be adorned from other perspectives compared to other Buddha lands, but this is the most unique feature of Sukhavati, That is, one can achieve Buddhahood within one lifetime. Unheard of any other Buddha lands. This is the only one that can offer us, right? For us, anyways, for mundane beings like us. At the same time, you cannot overcome complacency simply by making life difficult for yourself. Right? We talked about inflicting suffering, self-inflicting suffering. You are not necessarily growing just because you are struggling, right? This calls for wisdom. Just because we put in hours and hours of meditation doesn't mean, and you spend decades learning Buddhism, it doesn't mean that you are growing, right? There are people who have studied Buddhism for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years even, and then at the end, they give up. That means that they spent their time spinning in their hamster's wheel, and they're not growing. So if you feel quietly pleased with yourself, then beware of complacency. Right? Beware of complacency. That's the message here. So if we want to make spiritual progress, it is best that here he says that it's best to seek rebirth in a human realm, where joy and pain are woven fine together. But of course, a better approach is to be reborn in Sukhavati, right? And the reasons he made this comment, the author made this comment. So, right, given those 6 realms, this statement is based on those 6 realms, excluding Sukhavati. But we can also look at this and understand a little bit further. So to understand why is it so difficult to achieve Buddhahood if we are not reborn in the human realm. But what does it mean to be human? Even if you in Sukhavati, even if you live on earth, what does it mean to be human? And why is it so difficult? Well, there are 2 ways to explain this. One is, if you look at from the perspective of probability, it is extremely low probability that we can be reborn, or a person can be reborn as a human. And the Buddha illustrates this in the scriptures. Is saying that there is a blind turtle who only emerges from the depths of the ocean once every 100 years, and that he will put his head through a wooden yoke. You see, like a platform, a wooden platform with a hole in it, and then once every 100 years, the turtle would rise to the surface, and then it's just so happened that as he rises to the surface that there's this wooden yoke with a hole in it, not any yoke, okay? It has a yoke with a hole in it that he pokes his head through. So the chance of that happening is almost 0, right? The illustration is that it is so extremely difficult to achieve the human life. And if we look at like statistical probability, if we compare to the number of humans on this planet compared to the number of insects, fish, and all sort of other creatures on Earth, the probability is almost close to 0, right? Wouldn't you say? So it is more fruitful to ask what it really means to be a human being. So we shouldn't take this literally. We should understand what it means. So what is the human state? To take a more contemporary interpretation of this statement, we will compare between the human state and a human being. I think it's more insightful to understand what is a human state than a human being. Because the human being is a physical body you can see. It's very easy. But it is more difficult to understand what the human state is. Right? So what is a human being? Is it because that you look like a human for 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, instead of ears, that you are human? So from my biological perspective, yes, that is a human being. right? You see a figure and you understand that is a human being. But to attain a human state is different. It requires something different to attain the human state. That is, you have to develop certain qualities to qualify as a human being, right? Because there are people who look human, but they don't act human. They act barbaric. They act like animals, right? So the process of becoming human consists of full development of such qualities as self-awareness, emotional positivity, responsibility, fidelity, and cooperativeness. Of course, this includes the 5 precepts: no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no false speech, and no intoxication. Right? The Buddha lays that out very clearly of the path to become not a human being, but to achieve a human state, the human state. Right? It isn't easy to be human. The human state, as the Buddha says, difficult to attain. So this should remind us that as human beings, we have great potential for spiritual development. That's why it's so precious, because it is a gateway for us to achieve Buddhahood. That's why it is so rare and precious. And therefore, we should make every effort to develop whatever potential that we have, right? We should not lose our human state, but we should cherish it and develop it. So whether you take the 6 realms literally or metaphorically or mentally, this teaching here is meant to be encouraging, to remind us that there is always some potential for enlightenment. Whether someday you feel very happy, although you may not be mindful of impermanence, there is still a chance for you to achieve Buddhahood. Or whether you feel depressed, you feel like there's no hope, there is still a potential for enlightenment. So we should never lose that focus. Because there are days where we feel very happy, and then the next day, in fact, not even the next day, it could be the next minute that we feel like at the bottom of the pit, right? And we cycle through the 6 realms. We traverse the 6 realms every day or every hour. And the point is that we should not lose sight of that potential of achieving enlightenment, right? We may cycle through the 6 realms, and that may be fine, but we should not lose the focus that we have the potential to break out of that cycle and to achieve Buddhahood. So here it says that even if you are in a hellish or preta-like, which is hungry ghost-like state of mind, with neurotic or aggressive behavior or thinking, there is still potential to make progress. Sometimes this is more difficult in a state of suffering than in negativity, than in a state of positivity. Sometimes it's difficult more than the other, but it is still, you have that potential to make spiritual progress. Of course, as I mentioned, it is much better to have rebirth in Sukhavati. And the basic criterion to achieve the rebirth in Sukhavati is to develop this joyful faith for rebirth. 志心信要, right? 激荡真要. Very joyful in looking forward for that rebirth. Does it make sense? Because our karmic tendencies create the world that we're in. It's not that we go into a realm that is permanently existing, but because we have created those worlds. So when we have this joyful faith for rebirth, we are creating our future, if you will, right? we will be resonating with those in Sukhavati. So moving on, so what is this process here? How do we get stuck in this cycle of life and death? And what is the gateway out of this cycle, this endless spinning cycle? So when we look again into the mirror of the drawing, the cycle of life, we will see the outer cycle, right? The outer ring, the 12 nidanas, the 12 links, 12因缘, 12nhân duyên, 12 nhân duyên. Before we've gotten to this point, we looked at the 6 realms, and we can understand more of ourselves, or our mental state, and what we need to do to get out of the mental state. Those are the 6 Buddhas in each realm that we talked about. But on the outer rim of this wheel of life, you have the 12 links. And it shows us, this picture shows us what is all that's happening from one state of existence to another. So here are the 12 links. Of course, there's no beginning, no end here, but the picture here is that the link starts with delusion, 无明, vô minh. Here it is where it is. And this picture here, if you can see, is a blind man walking, a blind man representing delusion. Because of this delusion that one creates this volition, 行, ahan, 行运, right? Which is, so this is a person constructing vessels of some sort. So this is constructive volitional activity, because the delusion that you have this egoistic drive, egoistic motivation, that's what it is. And the third link here is, you see a monkey climbing on a tree, grabbing the fruits. So that's consciousness. So you have this consciousness, which is the intentions to realize that egoistic drive. And because of that we have the consciousness, the sensory consciousness. So those coming from your 6 senses, right? Like your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue. So those consciousness, because of our volitions, that we create these 6 types of consciousness. Does it make sense? Right. And then the fourth here is name and form, which is the constituent elements of mental and physical existence. Your 5 skandhas, anyway, 五蕴, right? 五文. So this is the picture here is of a man on a boat steering. That's name and form, which is you start to have this physical existence and mental existence. And then this 5th link here is you have a house and windows, and those are your senses. So with your consciousness, you have 6 types of sensory consciousness that you start to form your physical senses. Your eyes, your ears, your nose, tongues, your body and mind. Eyes for seeing, right? Ears for hearing sounds, nose for smelling scent, and tongue for tasting, and bodies for contact, right? Bodies for contact, and the minds to think. The minds you have this mental objects that you think, and that's the 6 senses. This picture here with windows, a house with the windows, those are your gateways to the outside world. And then you have here a woman and a man embracing. So that's contact. Lover, consorting, kissing, entwined, and all that. You have this contact that leads you to want to be attached to it. You find comfort in it, or you detest it. You want to run away from it. Revulsion or attachment. So this is in general. Contact will lead you to pain and or pleasure. In this case, it's illustrated as pain as you see as an arrow in the eye of this person. That's pain because of contact that leads to pain. But here it also represents joy as well. right? So you get stuck in this cycle of pain and joy. And of course, with pain, it leads to thirst. You say you have a man being offered something to drink. And then the ninth link is grasping, become attached to it, illustrating a monkey grabbing a fruit to enjoy. You start to grab, egoistic grasping. And of course, with that, there is becoming, this is conception, a couple copulating. And then, of course, that's birth. And then the last here is old age and death. And then it continues in a process of finding another rebirth for us to achieve our volitional activity. So the cycle continues and continues. Does it make sense? So you can divide this into 3 parts: the past, the present, and the future. What has brought us to today is because of our momentum from our past life, our ignorance, our karmic volitions or formations. Right? So you can refer these two as your past activities. And they have their karmic propensities, 业力, this like karmic momentum that have shaped our present life. So how we are living today, we are shaping tomorrow, our life of tomorrow. So you can see that it's not very easy to change our present being, because we spend our past, the time of the past, not only the last life, but the life even before that, we have this residual that we have formed, and it has gained so much momentum that we cannot easily change. So we are being controlled by our karma, and that's why we have no freedom. We are being sucked. Whatever we think, we see something, we react to it karmically. We get trapped. That's why the cycle continues. So independence upon ignorance, we have volition, 行 or 行运, So this is not to say that ignorance is the start of life in time. It starts with ignorance, but it is outside of time. Right? The circle has no beginning, it has no end. And where can we break this circle? We will discuss that momentarily. So that's what we're interested in, is how to break this circle so we can achieve spiritual liberation. Now our current life that we have done in the past, our ignorance, our karmic formations have created our current life. And we have now to bear fruit of that karmic tendency. So there's karma of our past life that is coming to fruition in a form of consciousness. So we have to understand that our past karma coming to fruition in a form of consciousness. And of course, this consciousness here technically refers to the 6 types of sensory consciousness through our physical senses and 1 mental sense consciousness. So in dependence upon volition, we have this consciousness, these 6 types of sensory consciousness. Right? The eyes, the ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind for sight, hearing, smelling, tasting, contact or touching, and mental activities. And consciousness, upon consciousness, that we have this 5 skandhas, the 5 heaps. So that 5 heaps are what? Are our physical, psychological elements. The 5 heaps are form, feelings, thinking, volitions, and consciousness. In other words, the makeup of our life, the physical and the mental, right? From our scan stars, which is our life, essentially the physical and the mental aspect of our life, from these scan stars come the six senses, and independence upon which arises contact. And this in turn leads to feeling. Right? We have these six senses, our physical senses. And when we have contact, we have sensations. It leads to sensations, leads to feeling. So these 5 links are all karma vipaka, meaning the fruits of our karma. Right? Vipaka means fruition. These are things that happen to us, and we have no choice about their arising. We have this body, and when somebody slaps us in the face, we feel hurt. That is, we have no control of that hurt feeling. Or when we taste something wonderful, we like it. We like the taste. That wonderful taste, we cannot control it because of the body, right? So they arise in dependence upon our past karma. So there are things that in the past that have created us that we cannot ignore. But the next link is different though. The next link, we have a choice. In the next link, we are now back in the realm of things that we do. So this is where we are driving our future. If we are not careful, we will continue to push the cycle of life and death. We will continue to increase the momentum of that wheel, or at least not stopping it from spinning. At this point, we create fresh karma by craving, which leads to grasping and becoming. So because of our sensations, right, whether we like it or we hate it, we have this egoistic attachment. We are egoistically attached to things that we like, but we are also egoistically attached to things that we don't like, we hate. It's the 2 sides of the same coin. Attachment represents something you like, but also something that you detest. You have aversion. Because of this attachment, that there is conceptions in the womb. And there is this conception in the womb. And that leads to rebirth. So the momentum of this karmic process leads to a future rebirth. Therefore, the last 2 links of the chain, birth and decay and death. So this is a grim snapshot of one's future life. So we look at this and we just don't look at this picture, but we should see ourselves in this picture. When we look at this outer realm, the 12 links, 12因缘, 12因缘, 12因缘. When we look at this outer realm of 12 links, we should be able to see ourselves. In other words, when we look at how we live our lives, we should know our future birth. Right? We should have some idea of our future birth. And of course, if we are reborn in this world with this physical body, there is no way of escaping old age and death. So how do we break this chain of rebirth? Instead of being succumbed to our karmic reactions, that we get angry when things are not suitable, things are not smooth, and we have this egoistic attachment, this egoist attachment when things are all right. There's a choice. We can learn to respond to pleasant feelings without craving, and to unpleasant feeling without aversion. Right? We can live a life without attachment, without craving. Of course, this is not just any regular craving, but it has to be neurotic craving, right? Something that's very deep in us that we want to satisfy, and also aversion. By doing so, we set up fresh karma, which will ultimately lead us beyond the wheel of life and death altogether towards enlightenment. So what we can learn from this is that it is not that we don't think or we don't do anything that we can attain spiritual freedom from suffering. Right? It's wrong to think that you can enter meditation or go into the heavens and have this joy and live forever and not have to do anything about it. It's not like you jump into this boat of meditation or boat of heaven that it will lead you there automatically. Here is saying that we have to respond to it skillfully and wisely in order to achieve spiritual liberation. Does it make sense? I think this is very important to reflect. That to achieve spiritual liberation, we have to generate momentum of spiritual liberation. Right? It doesn't come automatically. Through the things that we do, we can direct the things that will happen to us in the future. Does it make sense? Right? It's not that to sit and accept a pass and hope for the best. In the business world, it is often said that hope is not a management tool. Right? You don't use hope to manage your business. Right? You do something actively. You worked at it. Right? You just don't sit there and hope. Through the things that we do, we can direct our next life towards the cycle of life and death, the samsara, the state of suffering, or towards sukhavati, right, the state of enlightenment. So it is the things that we do with our minds, our mental events, that make all the difference. Right? Even though we are stuck in this physical body, we're limited with what we can do, but we are completely free in what we can do in our mind. Right? We can always project our mind towards positivity, towards Amitabha, towards the Western Pure Land. To resonate with them, we are driving a boat, if you will, towards the Western direction. Does it make sense? Of course, this is to understand conditionality. This is conditionality. We put in the proper effort to get to the proper state and not wish or hope that we'll get there. Hope is not conditionality. Right? Hope is delusion. However, not everything we experience is the direct result of things that we have done. So we should understand this carefully. It is wrong to think that things happen to us because of karma. That's not Buddhism. Yeah, to think that things are predetermined, that's predeterminism, right? That's not Buddhism. But we should understand that there are 5 niyamas, meaning 5 elements, if you will. The combination of these 5 elements result in our state of being. So it's not, and karma is just one of the 5. Many things that happens to us simply arise out of the environment in which we find ourselves. So it's not just our karma because we are in the environment that we are under its influence. For example, if there's bad weather preventing us from doing a job, going to do whatever we need to do, we cannot say that it is because we have obstructed somebody in the past and therefore the rain is obstructing us from achieving what we want to do. Right? The rain has may have prevented you from doing something, but it doesn't mean that it is because of you have prevented somebody in the past. Right? So it's not like an eye for an eye kind of thing, right? That you experience something is because of the direct karmic actions that you perform in the past. We should not take the law of karma too literally. Although what happens to us may do so as a result of physical, biological, and psychological, and even transcendental factors, as well as arising from our karma, one could argue that these factors have indirectly karmic origin. Yes, there may be some karmic influence, but it's not the primary factor. That the rain is there to obstruct us in achieving what we want to do that day. But if bad weather sometimes stops one from doing what one wants to do, then one could say that it's a result of one's having been born as a particular psychophysical organism inhabiting, living in that environment. So how has one come to be in possession of this particular psychophysical organism, this physical body? Well, one could say that because of previous karma that one has performed. So to conclude that one could say, yeah, it's all karma. So one could use that answer. Everything is karma. Yes, but it's not very clear of an answer. Right? So according to this live reasoning, one could conclude that everything we experience is in fact our karmic fruition. The fruition of our karma. So not in a literal eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth sense. We should understand that there are other factors that influence the fruition that we are experiencing. There is some karma into it, but it's not the entire factor, because there could be environment, right? For example, like when rocks fall or a chemical reaction, it's not necessarily because of our karma. Or like, for example, like metal rust. It's not because of our karma, because it's this physical properties that it rusts. Like titanium doesn't rust, aluminum doesn't rust, but steel rusts because of its physical properties, not because of our karma. Does it make sense? So whether without our karma, it will rust because of its physical properties. So not everything is karma. There's also a term called collective karma, and it refers to being in an environment where it doesn't belong to you individually or anybody individually, but because you come together, that you have this effect. It's called collective karma. But though this term has no traditional provenance, it does not exist in the original text scriptures. So maybe later on somebody has discovered this effect and term it collective karma. So the word comes into existence, so to speak, because a number of beings have performed the same kind of actions. See, the 6 realms that we just talked about is collective karma, in a sense that everybody has the same idea of how to live a life. Like, for example, in the realms of hungry ghosts, they all believe that having possessions is the most wonderful thing in life, right? To acquire as much as you can is the most wonderful thing to them. So that creates this realm of never enough, never contented. They can never be contented. They can never be happy with what they have because they are always looking to acquire. This makeup of common karmic effects, fruitions, constitutes the world and perceived in common. The same thing with Pure Land, right? That this, by virtue of Buddha's infinitely powerful volitions, that he can create this ideal environment. And those who have managed to tune in to this Pure Land can also be reborn into it. Does it make sense? Right? So when we think about Amitabha, and when we have this joyful faith, we are tuning in to Kavati, right? So here's a glimpse of our own future. After this life, we either get stuck in the samsara, continue to cycle through this endless opposites of joy and pain, right? That's one possibility. Or we have another possibility of migrating to Sukhavati, where we will have infinite life and be on the continuous spiral growth, where we go from happiness to joy, to rapture, to calm, to bliss, and nirvana. Whereas in the samsara, it cycles endlessly between joy and pain. Those can be our two choices after this life. And it is up to us to make that decision, to drive that boat towards our desired destination. The fundamental implication here is that volition, 情愿, our volition, our egoistic drive, is a creative force that is capable of producing what we would call objective consequences. So a thought, in a sense, is everything. A thought is a force. A thought is a power. And a thought is an energy. Right? But what exactly does it produce? What kind of energy? What does this energy produce? And what do we mean by objective consequences produced by volitions? The thoughts that we have in our mind, we cannot say that it creates matter. Sometimes we misunderstand that that the thought can create matter, but that's not what it means here. What it means here is that thought produces rupa. Rupa means form. That is our objective content of the perceptual situation. It creates mental perception. But it doesn't mean that it's not real. It's a mental perception. Saying that perception is real, right? How people perceive you is how they think you are, and that's they think that you are real as how they perceive you. So we should not go as far as to think in terms of an object which is actually out there waiting for us to perceive it. It's not what it means that our thought can create this object that is physically existing. What this means here is that we don't truly know what is there. When we pick up an object, we think it's a flower, we think it's a key, but that's our thinking. It's not what it truly is. In fact, we will never know because of our sensory consciousness. We can only interpret what we sense through our 6 types of sensory consciousness. Does it make sense? So what that means is that when we are, whether there is when we are mindful of the Buddha, for example, that we have this inner thought, that we are resonating with it, and that we form this conceptual object. And according to this sutra, that we will eventually see the Buddha either now, in this lifetime, or in the future. So our karma will drive rebirth, and that will drive happiness or suffering because of our life, or it can drive towards enlightenment. The main point to take away here is that as one's mind is, so is one's karma, so is one's rebirth, so is one's happiness or suffering. And ultimately, with the attainment of enlightenment, one is free even from the alternation between happiness and suffering. Right? It all depends on the mental events. And what is this mind, and what is the mental events, what are the mental events? We will discuss it next time. We don't have the time to go into that. So coming to an end, almost an end here. We look again into the mirror for the 5th time, and we will see the cosmic impermanence and unreality of conditions' existence. So in the view of this picture, you remember, right? There's this ferocious figure, this monster, gripping this wheel, of life. This wheel of life is the what we see in that is the face of death, and which is the cosmic impermanence. So the will that is being held by this fearsome figure represents impermanence. This will here, impermanence, that he's gripping on. And this ferocious figure here is sometimes being described as Mara or Yama. Yama means death, the god of death. The sixth heaven, these are the highest. Or the Lord of Death is called Yama. But regardless of what this figure represents, it means the same thing. That is, the entire process of cyclic existence is transient, impermanence, 无常, volatile. So it tells you that this cycle here is impermanent. It continues to revolve. It does not stop. Everything within it is constantly changing. So Yama, this figure has the following attributes. He wears this crown of 5 skulls, representing 5 poisons or 5 skandhas that we talked about. 无蕴, 无恩, right? The form, the physical body, and the mental characteristics. Those 5 skandhas. And he has a third eye. You look at it, he has a third eye here, and that represents the wisdom of understanding impermanence. So he does understand impermanence. He understands how the process of life works, but he decides to keep us within it. And we are blind to that insight. And he sometimes shows to wear a tiger skin, you remember. That always symbolizes fearfulness. So, and his 4 limbs, he has 4, like 2 arms and two legs, right? Gripping this will of life. Those 4 limbs symbolize sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death. So that's what it represents here. We are face to face with death. And that's what the Buddha says here, is that what is the origin of suffering? The Buddha asked the monks. And the Buddha answered, it is that craving which gives rise to ever fresh rebirth and bound up with pleasure and lust. And so the transition from sensation to craving, from passive feeling to active desire, from blissful to a miserable state of sphere of existence, that we continue to be stuck in that cycle of life and death. So things happen to us, we get a slap in the face, we feel hurt. That's passive. But now we have anger. When we have anger, when we cause rise to anger, we are pushing the wheel of life and death. Right? We continue to push it. So this is what produces rebirth and also produces victory over the cycle of life and death. So there is hope. There is hope in this story. That is, from this passive to active state, that we can decide whether to continue to push the wheel of cycle of life and death, the wheel of life and death, or to stop it and to escape the cycle. The interval between these 2 links is the battlefield of the spiritual life, and to experience feelings, yet check desires, is that victory over oneself, which the Buddha declared to be greater than the conquest of 1,000 men 1,000 times. So you look at this here, in the depth of conditionality, there is unconditionality, meaning that within the cycle of life and death, there is an opportunity to be liberated if we can see it deeply, meaning that we can turn afflictions into bodhi, enlightenment. We can turn samsara into nirvana. Right? So the future is in our hands. The wheel of becoming has made its one revolution. right? From ignorance to decay and death, right? We've seen that, right? The 12 links. Of course, this is far from being due to fate or chance, right? We should understand that we have an opportunity, the potential to stop it, and not as somebody who has created us. It's not a fiat of created God or human bondage to phenomenal existence. But it is something that we have created and we can put it to rest. So the secret of bondage is also the secret of liberation. In there is hope. In the problem resides the solution, right? And how do we do this? By exerting a force stronger than that of hate, stronger than desire, egoistic desire, selfish desires, stronger even than ignorance. The will of becoming, the will of life, can be made to revolve in the opposite direction. So it's not just stopping it, but you reversing its direction. That means from cessation of birth comes the cessation of decay and death, and then from that to becoming, and then birth and cessations of becoming, cessation of birth, cessation of attachment, cessations of craving, cessation of feeling, cessations of contact, cessations of feeling, 6 bases, name, form, and all the way through ignorance. So eventually, cessation of ignorance, right? Which is the cessation of the whole mass of suffering. But of course, Buddhism does not stop at just cessation. That's not the goal of Buddhism. That is, in fact, far from being the last word of Buddhism. Nirvana itself is not a state of mere non-existence. And it should not be understood as a gradual approximation to a state of absolute annihilation. It is annihilation in a sense of annihilating greed, anger, and ignorance, not annihilation of existence itself. In Buddhism, the spirit of Buddhism is not only cessation of suffering, but attainment of enlightenment. Right here, the Buddhist, here it says that what the disciple achieves with annihilation, breaking the last link of the chain binding him to phenomenal existence, but also more positively is the attainment of supreme enlightenment. So not only of a cessation of this or that condition, condition making for rebirth, but also for suffering, also for of the production of positive factors, with the realizations of Sambodhi. Sambodhi is 三妙三菩提, 三妙三菩提, which is ultimate enlightenment. So nirvana, achieving nirvana, breaking away from the cycle of life and death, eliminating our desires, selfish desire, is not mundane and dry and plain, but it is very positive. In the traditional Mahayana, enlightenment is considered supreme union of samadhi and prajna. Samadhi means concentration. Prajna means wisdom. Border, right? Sanmoti and border. Samadhi. Of transcendental insight and supremely positive emotions. So samatha, we have this void, this concept of void, and it's not just for clear mental experience. When you see void, you see conditionality. It's not just to see things clearly, but together in experience of intense bliss. When you combine wisdom with samadhi, concentration, you have this supreme union of intense bliss. So enlightenment is blissful, in contrast to the cool, emotionally astringent nirvana, which Theravada Buddhism is popularly proposed to envisage. But nirvana is emphasized throughout Buddhist tradition. Like in the Dhammapada, describes nirvana to be a state of the highest bliss. Right? So it's very positive. So let's look at the mirror one more time, two more times, and then we end here. So look into the mirror. Again, we see on the top right, if you will, the Buddha. And this is probably us, showing us to the other side of the drawing, and that is enlightenment. You can see here the rabbit. This is the moon, and there's a rabbit. And this rabbit here represents or symbolizes the heroic sacrifice that the Buddha made in his one of his previous existences. So when we look at this rabbit, we are reminded of the Buddha's heroic sacrifice, right? A bodhisattva ideal, bodhisattva vow to help all sentient beings. We sacrifice our time and resources to help others. So the final look into the mirror is where one will be transcended and fulfilled, the left side of the drawing. And when we look at this, we don't see anything at all. The mirror disappears. There's nothing to see, nobody to see it. But at the same time, mysteriously, everything is seen, everything is heard, everything is understood, and everything is realized. So this symbolism of the Tibetan will of life has been transcended and fulfilled. Right? So we achieve the state of the ultimate. So let's summarize what we have discussed. Under the influence of the three poisons, the center of the figure, you remember the drawing, create karma, what drives us to create karma, and that drives us to create the 6 realms. So we create the 6 realms. The 6 realms are not created for us to be reborn into. We create the 6 realms. When we create the 6 realms, we can put them to rest. So we traverse the 6 realms many times throughout the day. So we should remember that whichever realm that we're in, we may have lost our aspiration down in the hellish realm, but we should remember that we still have the potential to achieve enlightenment. And when we are in the state of bliss, very heavily, we should be reminded of impermanence, that we should not lose our focus of our long-term goals to achieve enlightenment. Right? Every moment, every experience throughout the day, we have the freedom to choose. And that is to choose to be stuck in the samsara, to continue to experience this cyclic physical and mental suffering. And sometimes it throws us a biscuit of joy, right? Or to take rebirth in Sukhavati, where we could have this continuous growth. So whether we take this physically or mentally, it's the realms that we create. And sometimes the experience is so intense that we believe the realm is real. The more experience, the more real it is to us. So when whatever we experience, it is through our perceptual experience. So the human realm is the most suitable for spiritual development, but the Sukhavati, better yet, is the most environment for attaining Buddhahood. Okay? The human realm is good for spiritual development, but if we are serious about achieving Buddhahood, we should look towards rebirth in Sukhavati. How do we break the cycle of life and death? It is by exerting a force stronger than that of hate, stronger than that of anger and ignorance. Right? We should not react karmically, but we should rise above that mundane experience, that mundane reaction. To reverse that cycle, right? In order to end this cycle of life and death, we should react positively, skillfully, wisely, if we want to reverse that cycle of life, that momentum, that direction. And that will help us to achieve nirvana. Nirvana is not a state of annihilation, but it is production of positive factors leading to no suffering and supreme enlightenment. And we do that with our bodhisattva spirit, right? Through our generosity, to our self-sacrifice to help others learn Buddhism so that they too can achieve enlightenment, not only us. Does it make sense? All right, the time is up, so we will do merit dedication. If you could please join your palms together, we recite. May the merits and virtues accrued today adorn the Buddha Pure Lands, repay 4 types of kindness above, and aid those suffering in the paths below. May those who see and hear of this bring forth the resolve for the Bodhi mind. When this retribution body is complete, together we shall meet in the land of ultimate bliss. If you could please rise, we bow to the Buddha 3 times to show our respect. First bow, second bow, and third bow. 阿弥陀佛。